Hello, my dear friends. You're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 31st of January of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, let's talk about NATO, because today we got a very important update that the United States of America and Germany opposed Ukraine's official invitation to NATO at the Alliance Summer Summit. So basically, we can say that NATO says no to Ukraine. And we can understand NATO from the very basic and simple understanding. For example, NATO, first of all, is a union not just of countries. It's a union of countries and its armies. To be more precise, it's the union of armies, the first level, and the second of countries of these armies. And when talking about Ukraine, we understand that maybe today on the 31st of January there is army in Ukraine, but obviously this army will be destroyed and reduced to ruins by the Russians. So that's why there is no need for NATO to make a union between countries with armies and, let's say, Ukraine without any army. Because, for example, according to information we have today, Putin made a lot of told us a lot of interesting things, and according to him, Russia is going to create demilitarized zone, the buffer zone, and this zone is going to be very huge, and according to my understanding, up to Dnipro River. Anyway, the main purpose of Russians is to reduce the bombings and shellings of the cities and towns of old Russia, let's call it like this. But the problem of this logic is the further you move to the west, from Russia to the west, and the longer this territory under Russian control, there are more chances that this territory is also will be considered as the territory without shelling from the Ukrainian side. So according to Putin, this demilitarization zone can be ended just somewhere in Lvov. And once again, so this is the reason why NATO says no to Ukraine. And not just that, not just Putin words, not that the understanding of the situation, not just because of the conflict between Zelensky and Zaluzhny. For example, today is the 31st of January. That means that the final day of the first month of 2024 has ended, and we now have some numbers about the previous months. And according to information we have, according to the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians since the beginning of the special military operation lost more than 414,000 people. Military personnel, of course, significant number, and from this number 23,000 people, a little bit more in this year, just for 1 month of clashes. When talking about the front lines, of course, the heaviest losses the Ukrainians had on Donetsk front line, more than 8,000, Liman area more than 5,000, a little bit less than 6,000, and the third place, South Donetsk, a little bit less than 4,000, then Kupyansk direction with battle for Sinkovka, and the last place stands for Zaporizhzhia and Kherson direction. 414,000 people, significant number, and now we see how the numbers of Ministry of Defense completely correspond to the reality, to the numbers that Zaluzhny, the head of Ukraine army, want to mobilize. He says that Ukraine needs to mobilize 500,000 people. So, and you see that almost the same numbers. Of course, the difference is huge, a little bit less than 100. But anyway, I believe that Russia doesn't have the real numbers, at least the final numbers. And Zelensky and Zaluzhny, of course, they know how many soldiers and people they have already lost since the beginning, and that's why they want just to replace the losses they had since the beginning of the special military operation. But Zelensky says Zaluzhny that it's too much, and I can't understand why do you need so many people. But Zaluzhny says, tells Zelensky that the problem is that you can't make mobilization for many reasons. I don't have like pipeline fresh resources. And when talking about Russia, every single day, according to the Ministry of Defense, they sign a significant number of contracts. More than 1,000 contracts Russia sign with the soldiers every day. So during the year, they can mobilize additional 500,000. And Zaluzhny says that Russia will mobilize 500,000, and you can't do this. So if you remember a few days ago, there were report that, according to information we have, Zelensky reported that there are around 800,000 soldiers currently protect Ukraine. And the Russians, President Putin told us that there are around 600,000 people on the ground in the area of the special military operation. So it's for now. But when talking about the situation in 4 months or in 5 months, if the Ukrainians are not able to implement or adapt mobilization law, That means that maybe will be the same numbers, but let's say a little bit for different sides. The Russians might have 800,000 people in the territory of special military operation, and the Ukrainians will have just 600 all over the entire Ukraine. So the situation is getting worse and worse. The Western countries try to solve the situation, I don't know, to ease the pain of Ukraine. And today we got another report that this year, very soon, the Dutch will send Ukrainians F-16s, will be delivered to Kiev this year, but the exact date is unknown. For example, the states reported that they will provide the Ukrainians new guided bombs that can attack Russian positions within 150 kilometers. This is a very big distance, of course, but this is not the game changer. You know that according to information we have, the Russians, according to previous reports, are able to use up to 150 guided bombs. I don't remember enough what for per one day or per 1 month, probably per 1 day. There was days when the Russians were bombed the Ukrainians using up to 150 guided, not just guided maybe, and just regular bombs, but per day. And the question is, how many these bombs, these advanced guided bombs, the United States of America can send to Ukraine? Thousands? Or hundreds? Or maybe just tens? I think that the numbers are about hundreds, so that's why it's not the game changer. And you know that another important update took place today. To be more precise, Victoria Nuland arrived in Kiev. And you know that this is very interesting update, because if you know, if you were following the situation in Ukraine a long time, since the beginning of the entire story, because special military operation didn't start in the February of 2022. Special military operation started in 2013, 2014, let's say almost more than 10 years ago, on the Maidan in Kiev. And Victoria Nuland also arrived in Kiev, and she gave people cookies and candies, and she tried to support people. So it's like something like an event. So everything started with her more than 10 years ago, and now she arrived in Kiev, and like it's like the end of the story. So everything started with her, and now everything is about to finish also with a visit of her in Kiev. So we'll follow the situation. Anyway, the problems and the situation in Ukraine is getting worse and worse. But for example, when talking about Russia, and not just about demilitarization zone, we had more updates about demilitarization zone. For example, today the Russians once again announced, and this is probably one of the most important military piece of news. Maybe we are not, let's say, following these updates because we don't quite understand the, let's say, the need or the value of this piece of news, and I'm talking about the creation and start massive production of new artillery system by the name of Koalitsiya SV, which distance of attack is around 70 kilometers. So there are no such artillery system that can be analog of this type of weapon from the Russian side. At least I don't know, maybe there are, but I don't know such type of weapon. Koalitsiya, and this is not something that will cost billions of dollars to create one artillery system, and your hands will be shaky if you send this type of weapon to the front line. The Russians are going to build thousands of this type of weapon. And once again, we are moving back to demilitarization area. This is the perfect weapon to establish complete superiority, artillery superiority somewhere in Kupyansk or Sumy or Kharkiv directions. Furthermore, another important update from Russia we got today, that according to official data from the Russian, let's say, military statistics, in 2023 they created more than 250 aircrafts and helicopters were delivered to Russian aerospace forces. And of course, from one side the number is big, but okay, 250, very good for the Russians, right? But if we go deeper inside of these numbers, it will be, at least I was shocked and amazed. According to official data, the Russians are going to have already produced 100 new aircrafts from these 250. And around 150 helicopters. Could you tell me why the Russians need so many helicopters? The Russians use aircraft Su-30, Su-35, Su-34 with guided bombs, with MiGs, with Kinzhals. They use significant number of different types of aircrafts to bomb and attack Ukraine, and we see that this is something that the Russians need more and more. But the question is, why do they need 150 helicopters? And then when I hear this number, first thing that comes to my mind, if you remember, during January we were talking that the Russians have already restarted or begun from the beginning the creation of air mobile brigades. And if we take 150 helicopters, if we take a group of soldiers that can get in one helicopter of these 150, we can say that these newly created 150 helicopters can redeploy a brigade in the rear front behind the Ukrainian positions. So all these things tell us that the Russians are going to show us and show not just us but the world something new and something interesting. Another important thing that I mentioned today this event took place in Sumy area, and today the Russians published another Lancet strike in this area. You may say so, but what is so important and interesting in another Lancet strike in the Sumy direction? I'll tell you. The thing is that I haven't seen Lancet strikes in Sumy direction before. Maybe there were a few strikes, but I don't remember when did it happen. And you know that if Lancet appeared on Sumy direction, that means that the Russians started something new. Of course, we need more information, more data to analyze whether it's just one case, maybe it's just the military exercises, because the military activity in this area is much less in comparison with Avdiivka, and there are less risks to lose operators of Lancet, and you need to train the operators of Lancet somewhere. And of course, Sumy is the best area where you can attack, let's say, Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian soldiers from territory brigades who doesn't have proper trainings and military skills and so on. But if we continue receiving more Lancet the next days, this will mean that the Russians start suppression of Ukrainian artillery, and this might be the first signs of the beginning of this demilitarization process. And based on the Lancet strike, this demilitarization area is going to start a little bit to the north from Sumy, and obviously this, let's say, area will be finished somewhere in Kupyansk. Now we're moving to Belgorod. Today, according to information we have, there was another prisoner exchange. The 195 armed forces of Ukraine prisoners of war were returned back home. The same quantity of Russian prisoners of war returned to Russia. And as you can see, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians took a decision to stop the exchange process after the situation with Il-76. And of course, this is a very good piece of news for both sides. This is like event when both sides try to have some negotiations and try to do something. And according to information we have, at least the Russians released mostly the defenders of Azov, those who were fighting in Mariupol, those soldiers who was in Mariupol almost 2 years ago. And this is also very important because, as I understand, the Russians finished the investigation process with the Ukrainian soldiers who were in Azov. There are a lot of criminals, a lot of people, according to information we have, received significantly big terms of prison in Russia, 25, 23, 27, 24 years. And they released probably those who didn't have any crimes on their hands and who were clear, according to at least more or less local law and something like this. Very interesting case took place in Kharkiv. As you can see, another few explosions in the city. To understand the picture, we always need to increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of months. The Russians, as you can see, are bombing Kharkiv heavily. But when talking about today, there was a very interesting case. Not very interesting, very funny, but to be more precise. Today, the Russians attack with drone, with Iskander, probably with a very expensive missile, one mall, trade mall, very big mall. You know, mall when you can come with family to buy some products, to buy some food, to buy some clothes. And this is the mall. It's not even a mall, it's less, it's some very big shop or something like this. But the problem is that this mall, there was a man, probably a young entrepreneur, probably individual entrepreneur, who opened his own small shop, very small shop, probably 10 square meters of rent place. But he made one mistake. He published his advertisement in the internet, in the open source, and he wrote that he fixed drones. Maybe he's buying some parts and getting some parts from China, or he can help you to buy some drones because he's like in this business, he knows what he's doing. And but his main mistake was probably he made this for marketing purposes. He established a picture of Armed Forces of Ukraine, the logo of Armed Forces of Ukraine, like saying that I have connections and I have contracts with the Ministry of Defense. And the Russians took a decision to use this information and destroy just a basic, I don't know, small shop, like vape shop, like coffee shop in different malls of 20 square meters of rent place with the guy who was selling or fixing drones, maybe for military forces as well. But that case, I found this case very funny. Now we are moving further to Kupyansk direction. We have some updates from this territory. We have very interesting video of Russian Ka-52 at work. These are two Ka-52 somewhere at the Sinkovka, Kupyansk direction. This is probably one of the Ka-52 that was created as from new batch of 2023. Who knows? On this sense, we see how those Ka-52 were sending missiles and bombs against Ukrainian positions, and then we can see the results of those strikes. When talking about the common situation, there were no changes on the ground, so we're moving further. There were no changes on the ground in updates from Avdiivka, just some more or less reliable sources from Russian side updated their map, showing that the hills that located to the west of Avdiivka is under complete Russian control. Once again, we're not going to change the map on the west and the north of Avdiivka due to complete absence of geolocated confirmations. We have colored Avdiivka just because of the report of the Ministry of Defense, because we consider Ministry of Defense report is something like more or less reliable, even more reliable than different mappers and assent resources, because first of all, it's reputation. You can't tell something that can't come true or something like this. But so this is the situation here. When talking about Liman, the same story. We haven't received any updates, but the thing is that regarding the fact that we haven't received even a single geolocation from this territory, we got very important updates from the Ministry of Defense, and we're talking about the numbers they provided. The Russians are storming this area with significant number of armored vehicles, infantry and forces, and they say about very heavy losses from the Ukrainian side, around 300 soldiers Ukrainians lost during today, during yesterday, during the previous day, the day before yesterday. So like for up to 4 days in a row, the Ukrainians are having significant losses, more than around 1,000 just for 3-4 days. So the losses are very heavy, but without any proofs or confirmations about the Russians entering Yampolov or Terny. But the situation is very difficult. When talking about Bilogorovka, we haven't received anything, but we have lots of updates from Sever's direction. And the most important thing is Lancet strikes once again. The Russians are moving focus, or they let's say deployed additional Lancet forces, or they're moving some focus from, let's say, Chasiv Yar to the north. But just during the previous 24 hours we got significant number of updates of Lancet strikes. So the Russians also are about to start something on this direction. As we know, the operational post in this area started a few weeks ago when the Russians established control over Veselaya, and of course it's not like the end of the mission. They need to continue movements. The main purpose is Siversk, to be more precise, Siversky Donetsk River. So that's why they're attacking the Ukrainians. They try to establish complete artillery superiority, which will allow which will not allow, but will make more secure the movements of Russian infantry and tanks on the ground. The Russians have endless resources with artillery sometimes, I have a feeling, and the European Union, for example, promised the Ukrainians 600,000 shells just by March, so it's nothing in comparison with the Russian production possibilities and the Russian, let's say, industrial possibilities as well. If we increase the numbers of updates on Sever's direction, we have few additional Lancet strikes, which is not the same, of course, in comparison with Bakhmut Artyomov's direction, where we can see complete endless number of this type of weapon. But when talking about the situation on the ground, we haven't received anything during the day. Just as we discussed, some Russian attempts to attack further in direction of Popovo Forest. We have some geolocation of that attack. I'm not sure for 100%, but 99% that this attack took place exactly here. Russian infantry storming the area. And we have another video of the use of cluster aviation bomb RBK 500 on the north of Ivanovska. And when talking about RBK 500, the Russians at some point start using this type of weapon massively, like maybe months ago or maybe 2 months ago. But after that, they stopped using this type of weapon at all. And now at the end of January, they start doing this once again. So very difficult and interesting question, why the Russians stop using this type of weapon for a very long term period of time, and now they have renewed this practice. When talking about Klishchiivka, we haven't received anything from this territory. Just as we discussed in the previous update, the Russians launched an offensive operation in the western part, according to this soldier who published his video or made this video on the 30th of January. When talking about the situation on the ground, we got just one video, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the small farm or small barrack that located on the eastern part of Klishchiivka, and there is no connection with the western part. Maybe he was saying that they're moving to the west, and he just, let's say, confused with the, let's say, directions and the geography. But anyway, according to geolocations we have, the Russians are very far from the central and the western part of Klishchiivka. Now we are moving to Avdiivka area. We have a few updates from this territory as well. When talking about Cheretsina, the Russians published the video of a failed Ukrainian rotation. A Ukrainian armored vehicle arrived at the position to change the forces, but the Russians attacked this area, and this armored personnel carrier started running away without even leaving their soldiers behind. No changes on the ground. When talking about Avdiivka itself, the Russians continue bombing the city, and as I understand this, of course, Avdiivka is not going to repeat the story of Bakhmut. The situation in this city is going to be much worse, but from the other side, probably Avdiivka is not going to become the next Marinka. It's going to be something between Marinka and Avdiivka. For example, on this video we can see how almost very high-rise buildings were reduced to ruins as a result of Russian FAB strikes. The Russians were destroying communication positions, let's say some fire positions, anti-tank positions with FABs. As you can see, almost every single building was damaged at least once since the beginning of battle for this territory. When talking about southern part of Avdiivka, we have a lot of updates, and for now we still haven't received any geolocated confirmation or any update whether the Ukrainians managed to restore control over Tsarskaya Khota. But once again, I repeat that according to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainians managed to return control over Tsarskaya Khota, and that they managed to cut the supply road in two parts. And this is according to the Ukrainians, yet we haven't seen and got any reliable confirmation of that. The Russians are saying that everything is under their control. Furthermore, the Russians are saying and published the video on how they were bombing the Ukrainians along Kirova Street. The Ukrainian positions, as you can see, are located in the lowland, so there is no problem for the Russians to bomb them heavily. And furthermore, additional Russian resources reported about certain progress along Kirova Street, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to establish control over this territory. For now, we don't have any geolocated updates, so that's why we're going to keep the map as is. Furthermore, probably the most important, the Russians continue offensive operation from industrial area to the north in direction of the filtration station. And today they published another video of artillery preparation of how they were bombing the forest. This video is geolocated for 100%. In this video, we see that currently, at least at this stage of the special military operation, at the Avdiivka siege operation, the Russian main focus is to cut the eastern flank of the city. So they continue movements, they continue bombing, and obviously the next days we're going to receive more updates of additional Russian progress in this forest. Now we are moving to the south, Donetsk direction. We haven't received anything from Первомайска, Krasnogorovka, Georgievka, Marinka, the same. The only updates we got today, important updates of a significant concentration of Russian FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian positions in the village by the name of Pobeda. And this can mean that the Russians renewed their offensive operation in this direction, and very likely the next days they're going to make first attempts of the ground operation with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to retreat from these positions, and this will open the Russians opportunities and possibilities, good chances to develop offensive operation further to the south in the cities like Konstantinovka, Novomikhailivka, and of course Paraskovivka. So significant concentration, which means that the next stage is attack on the ground. When talking about Novomikhailivka, there were no changes during the previous 24 hours. When talking about Avdiivka tactical bridgehead, we continue receiving updates of Russian attacks. If we increase the numbers of updates for the previous 4 days, we're going to see the Russian activity. We were talking during the previous days that the Russians improved their positions to the north of Pryutin, but they managed to establish significant control over significant territory. And furthermore, we got more details and more, let's say, attacks from the Russian side with SnowStorm tower systems between Pryutin and Rovnopol, the city that is under Ukrainian control. Which means that the Russians do have some plans, and probably they have already chosen the direction of the further attack, and they're gonna attack Rovnopol, at least with some forces on this direction. But today we got another very interesting video of, to the west from Staromaiorske. On this scene we can see another huge and massive Russian tank rush with significant number of armored vehicles, personnel carriers under support of artillery, probably FPV drones with reconnaissance. I have calculated and counted around 10 armored vehicles that attacked with different groups. There were at least 2 groups of attacks. The first one goes to the north along one tree line. The second one moved and turned to the east and started movements in direction of Staromaiorske. For example, in the second we're gonna start the convoy. See convoy. This is it. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the convoy I'm talking about. 1, 2, 3. The first 2 moved further. We need to change the angle of the video. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We see anti-tank strikes. So very big convoy of Russians were moving, capturing additional positions. This is it. And obviously this video was published by the Russians. That means that attack was successful. And if we move back to the map, the Russians were using the following tactics. They were using and moving along these 3 lines. In this point they split the army in 2 parts. The first one moved further to the north and the second one moved further to the east, but the second group was stopped somewhere here as a result of Ukrainian counterfire. Probably as a result of that attack, the Russians managed to improve their positions and got closer to the village by the name of Staromaiorske. An important note about this attack is that the Russians, or general or commander of this group, use the same tactic always. He used more than one group of attack at the same time. If you remember, when talking about Pryutin, we were watching this video yesterday, the Russians also were using the same tactics, significant number of armored vehicles that are moving at one point, and when they get one point, they split their forces into 2 or 3 attack fists. The same story took place here. The Russians first got this line, and on this line one group moved to the west and another group start movements to the east. And the same story we've just seen on the video to the west of Staromaiorske. Very interesting. Now we are moving further to Zaporizhzhia, Robotina area. We haven't received anything from this area, just few FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian positions on the south, so nothing special. Another video how FPV drones attacks and stormed Ukrainian trenches full of soldiers who took a decision not to surrender, but this is their, let's say, decision. When talking about Kharkiv and Kherson, we have received few updates, and for the first time, probably for the previous 2 or 3 weeks, the Ukrainians published the videos of HIMARS strikes against the Russian multi-launch rocket systems Grad. 2 strikes, 2 systems were destroyed, and there were the only 2 HIMARS strikes probably for January of 2024. Maybe there were more, but I don't remember when exactly. And when talking about Kharkiv itself, there is no more Kharkiv. Of course, this part, the Russians published the video of the situation on the ground. As you can see, this area was reduced to ruins. There are no buildings left. The Russian drones flying above this territory always. They're flying, trying to search the lost Ukrainian soldiers. There are hundreds, maybe not, there are tens of drones at once flying above this territory. The Ukrainians obviously don't have chances for expanding this, to expand this territory. I'm not even sure what the Ukrainians are doing here, but the Ukrainians are doing something. So another video from another part of Kharkiv, another area with drone from the Russian side who is filming the situation. And from the other side, the Russians either can't, let's say, establish complete control and to reach, let's say, this line for many reasons, and the most important one is that there are no buildings to hide under Ukrainian FPV drone strikes, because the Ukrainians also attack the Russians. We have the video of them, and they are geolocated. And from interesting videos, let's take a look at the city by the name of Matrosovka. On this video we can see the use of FAB 500 or FAB 1500. The Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian position or ammo depot or artillery warehouse, and as a result of FAB strikes there was a very heavy explosion with secondary detonation. And we see that from now on, from January, there are no more problems from Ukrainian air defense for Russians in this area. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.